Adorning the front of the Zoom PodTrak P4 is the statement, the ultimate recorder for podcasters. But how does it really stand up to the rigours of being a day-to-day jobbing podcaster? Let's get this brand new offering from Zoom unboxed and answer the question, is the Zoom PodTrak P4 good for podcasting? When you take the Zoom PodTrak P4 out of the box, the first thing that you notice is just how light this is. I mean, we are used to the Zoom H4n, the H6, and in some cases the LiveTrak L-8, all pieces of Zoom hardware that I've had the pleasure of using over the years, and all fantastic pieces of kit for the day-to-day podcaster. But this Zoom P4, it's an entirely different species of device from Zoom, and ultimately is exceptionally light. What I really like about this is the fact that, of course, you can throw this in your bag. I do a lot of traveling with my podcast, and very often I'm at conferences like Podcast Movement or Podfest or Social Media Marketing World, and I have to take a recorder with me. It's not taking up really any weight. I can hold it for as long as I want, really. That comes with a little sacrifice. Now, if you are used to things like the Zoom H6, you will notice the sacrifice of the microphones. You don't have any external microphones on here, but that's all right, because that's really not the intent. I mean, if you wanted that, you would just get a Zoom H6. And I think this is the key thing to remember with this P4, is that it's not intended to replace that platform. It's not intended to replace the H6. It is intended to do its own job, which is to be a podcaster's day-to-day tool. When you open the box up, you'll be struck by, frankly, how little there is inside there. You get a couple of batteries, which pop into this battery slot just at the back here. Very simple, nice and easy. You'll see if I pop it off, it is what it is. I've popped the batteries in there. It works quite nicely. It's fairly robust, but there's not that much else in there. You don't really get any cabling with it. You don't get any data transfer cabling with it, which is kind of a challenge. That's a bit of a shame. At least there wasn't one in my box. Maybe I was overlooked when Zoom sent me this to review, but I didn't get any cabling in there. It's the recorder, the batteries, and the instruction manual. You can just crack on doing that. Now, when we turn this on, what you'll see is that it's not got that kind of hardware switch that you're used to with some of the bigger recorders. So if I just pop this on the Zoom PodTrak P4, you'll see it comes on. It's a very nice little screen, and it really is a little screen. If you look at that, if you can see that outside the ring light, it's a very, very small screen. You pop your SD card into the side as you would expect. You've got your SD card slot, which is fantastic in there. It just works. It just works really nicely to be able to pop that slot off and pop the SD card in. Now, one thing that I will say, just if I pop this out, look at the format of the SD card. It's a full-size SD card, which surprised me. I thought it was going to be a micro SD like the RØDECaster, which is quite an interesting choice, but it doesn't really matter that it's not a micro SD. It just, it's not making the unit really any bigger. You're not losing any space from it. So overall, nice kit, all right? We like it. Now, I am going to do another video on me recording into this. I'm not going to do any recordings on this because I want to do that fully separately and dedicate a complete video to that. So go and check that video out if you haven't already for the actual audio quality of this. Now, let's just break down the inputs and the outputs, all right? So what's interesting about this Zoom PodTrak P4 is that it does have the 4 XLR inputs, which I think are vital for a jobbing podcaster. Of course, you might only use 1, you might only use 2, but look, the fact of the matter is that having 4, it's not detrimental to the size, and it's fantastic to be able to take this out to a conference and say, well, I'm going to interview 4 people here. The options that you get with this are fantastic, so I'm very, very impressed with that. Then we've got the input levels for each one of these. You can see this is all very straightforward stuff. Input levels, whether you need phantom power, whether you're muting that microphone or not. Look, you'll see those on there. It works really well. It's very, very simple. Perhaps the most interesting thing, though, about this Zoom PodTrak P4 is where it sits in comparison to things like the LiveTrak L-8, which we have already reviewed on this channel as well. How it stands up to things like the RØDECaster Pro. Now, I'm using a RØDECaster Pro every day at the minute. This, I believe, stands up to that. And the reason is that these sound pads here, A, B, C, and D, they can be preloaded with sounds, whether that is ad content, whether that is your intro, your outro. You can set these really, really nicely. Now, it's not as clear cut as the LiveTrak L-8 is, or as the RØDECaster Pro is, insofar as you have a series of sliders with those two devices where you can do almost live mixing. Now, of course, you could do that with this PodTrak P4, but it's a dial, all right? But it's intended to be mobile, so we can kind of add some concessions there. But bear in mind, if you do add your intro and the outro, what I do personally with this is I pre-mix my intro to have the ducking already pre-built, so when I start talking, I know, for example, that if I start talking after a minute or after 10 seconds, my audio intro will already be pre-ducked to account for the fact that I don't really want to be mixing on this live. One more thing that I want to mention with regards to these sound pads here is that Zoom seems to have thought out the wording around these. So when you set these up versus, for example, the RØDECaster Pro, the wording is much simpler. You know exactly what's going to happen when you press a button and when you press it again. The RØDECaster Pro, really, is a little bit too technical sometimes with that. And that's what I really like about this Zoom overall, is that it's just been really well thought out from a pure day-to-day podcasting perspective. And I love the RØDECaster Pro, don't get me wrong, but I think in certain areas for simplicity, this Zoom PodTrak P4, it really has the edge, it's really well thought out. Following that, we've got the, like I said, we've got the volume channel here for the sound pads, and then we've got the outputs, which are the headphones, which you'll see are actually the smaller headphones that you'll be used to from just day-to-day headphone use. They're not the big audio jacks, the 1/4 inches that you'd ordinarily expect on a mixer like the LiveTrak or, of course, the LiveTrak L-8 or the RØDECaster Pro, but that's all right. Again, it's supposed to be mobile. We don't want to be carrying two big Sony headsets around with us. We want to be carrying some iPhone headphones around with us, or some normal size ones. So actually, that's really well thought out for the traveling day-to-day podcaster. A couple of other things that make this fascinating. The fact that you can power this using a USB-C. So that's quite nice. You can power this. You don't have to use the battery pack. And one thing that I also really like about this Zoom PodTrak P4, it's just really, really simple. And I mean really, really simple to see what's going on. You can link it to a computer. You can use it as your standard audio interface. So if, like me, you run your microphones through an interface, ordinarily something like a LiveTrak L-8, a H6, a H4n, or even a RØDECaster Pro, this does the job of interfacing with your computer as well. You'll see there we've got this little USB slot. Can you see that just right there? So how does the Zoom PodTrak P4 stack up when it comes to price? Well, it's surprisingly good. For under $200, you can pick up the Zoom PodTrak P4 and it won't break the bank. It's something that's very affordable to the starter podcaster and, of course, to the scaling podcaster. And Zoom have really thought this through. In comparison to its own LiveTrak L-8, its own H4n and the H6, the Zoom PodTrak P4 is far more affordable. When you compare it to the desktop counterpart of something like the RØDECaster Pro, it's a no-brainer. The RØDECaster Pro coming in at over $500. Not really giving you that much more over and above what the PodTrak P4 does for the day-to-day podcaster. I really, really like this kit, and I have done some recordings with it. I'm not going to do it on this video just for the sake of brevity. It's a great piece of kit. The menu system's fairly easy to use. It's obvious what's going on. It's easy to transport. You could put this in your back pocket, all right? It's a fantastically designed bit of kit. It's not all roses. I do have some slight tweaks that I would like to see in version 2 of the Zoom PodTrak P4. Number one, it would be lovely to have a color screen in the second version, just so that you can see what's going on a little bit more. In particular, it'd be good to have that color screen to show recording levels. That's the real big thing with the color screen that you see on so many devices, that you can see the recording levels, you can see the clipping, you see the green, the amber, and the red. That would just be really, really nice addition. But look, for the price of this is not to be sniffed at. In a similar vein, it would be good to see some decibel meters on there, just to see, again, what is going on with the recording. It's really not the end of the world, but in version 2, or maybe a firmware update later, Zoom, let's just maybe add some decibel meters in there as well. Just make our lives easier on the road, or when we're feeding the Zoom PodTrak P4 into a computer. One thing that I did notice when running recordings as well is that there is an ever so slight lag. When you press record, it takes about a second for the actual recording to start. So what I tend to do with my show, the Podcast Accelerator, is I'll record it fairly live. So I'll load the sound pad up, and what I will then do is go ahead and just say, well, look, I'm just going to play the intro, I'm going to just start my spiel and my content, and hopefully not really do too much editing afterward. Because of that 1 second lag that you experience after pressing record, that can take a little bit of getting used to. But again, it's not a deal breaker, it's just one of those things that you get used to. With any new piece of hardware, there are some nuances that you've got to get used to, and this is just one of them with the Zoom PodTrak P4. It would be great to see a companion app. The reason for that is that when you load these sound pads up right here, A, B, C, and D, you have to load them onto the SD card. Now, the SD card only takes 16 and 24-bit files. That's all right. It will convert your files for you. But it's a little odd if you come from something like a RØDECaster Pro to not have a companion app where you can just drag and drop audio into this thing. Because look, it's got the interface to a computer. So there's no reason that this couldn't be done through a companion app. It requires fiddling and getting used to a slightly different methodology. Again, it's really not a deal breaker. It's just something different. So just bear that in mind. One of the other negatives that I just want to bring to your attention here is that in order to connect your mobile devices fully, in order to get the mix minus capability that you can do here through a phone, you do need to buy the external BTA-2 cable from Zoom. Again, it's not a deal breaker, but it's just one of those little annoyances where it would be lovely just to have that in the box so that you can truly do everything that you need to do with this Zoom PodTrak P4. But look, let's be honest, this is a sub $200 piece of equipment. We can't expect everything. In conclusion, the Zoom PodTrak P4 is a fantastic piece of podcasting hardware. Zoom has done a wonderful job of thinking through what a podcaster needs, even in this first version. With these inbuilt sound pads and the breadth of microphone inputs and headphone outputs that you have, I truly believe that the Zoom PodTrak P4 is not only the perfect travel companion for the day-to-day podcaster, but it's also the perfect desktop companion for the podcaster that's not looking to break the bank. The Zoom PodTrak P4 is my recommendation right now for getting started with podcasting. Plugging in a very versatile microphone into what is ultimately a very versatile piece of podcasting equipment will give you everything you need to start and scale your podcast.